Welcome to my art workshop. We are going to be making beads and bubbles using air-dry, colorful Play-Doh. This is part one for the creative jewelry making. So I'm going to show you some of my favorite tools to work with and show you some of the ways that I like to make jewelry. So we are going to be using these very fancy art supplies, and of course the Play-Doh. So let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is to pick out the colors that we're going to work with. And I'm going to pick this green and this blue. And the Play-Doh Plus has an easy to remove cap, and actually the colors of the caps are pretty much the colors of the Play-Doh when it dries. It's also a really good idea to work with a damp rag that you can clean your fingers off and then dry your fingers off with. And also, I like to work with a plate to put the beads on to dry. This is a recyclable paper plate. What I'm going to do is make a meatball by rolling the clay in between my two hands. And actually, when I roll the clay right here, I'm giving myself a kind of massage, which reflexologists would say give us a feeling of well-being. So that's not a bad idea. And I'm going to make some polka dots. Little ones, big ones. One color polka dot, two color polka dot, double color, whatever I want to do. And I'm going to make a little coil of clay, or what we say with children is a little clay snake. And something that I love about this Play-Doh Plus is that it's so soft that it's pretty easy to make these add-ons of another color, so I can have a pretty interesting looking bead. And of course, the thing that changes this ball into a bead is putting a hole in it. So you can use this coffee stirring stick, looks like a miniature straw, or the one that is pointed, and just twist and drill, and I can take this little extra and put it on top. And the trick here is two things. If I pull this out this way, it's quite possible that I will have clay kind of folding in on itself. So I'm going to recommend pushing it all the way through as if you are sewing. The other thing to think about is that we want this hole in the bead to be large enough to thread the string through. And you can see that it fits inside of this red tube, so that should be fine. The Play-Doh does not seem to shrink, at least not very much, as it dries. It'll take about 2 days to dry. If you are going to be stringing your bead through something like this, which is a wire necklace, a choker that has a magnetic clasp, you want to be sure that the hole in your bead is big enough for the small part of the clasp to fit through. And so what I'm going to recommend is that you do a little wiggling, just a little wiggling to make sure that the hole is a little bit bigger. And if I pull it through, I want to take a look at this top edge and fix it, smooth it now, so that I don't have to file it later. And I want to be sure that the hole went all the way through. And I also want to be sure that when I put it to dry, I put it down carefully and don't squish. I don't want to squish the hole closed. And so sometimes I do recommend leaving it on the stick, and it will come out later. And take it out gently so that it doesn't crack. I can make lots of ball beads. I can make them large. I can make them small. I can make them fancy, or I can make them plain. And the idea is to think about what you are going to be stringing on your necklace. And so let's say I want to make a tube. The way to make a tube is to make the ball and then change it into a tube shape. And I'm finding that I get a better result putting a dark color on top of a light color for some reason. I like how that looks better. And of course, I could just marbleize the clay, meaning I could just mix together some green and some blue and get a kind of marble color. And let's turn that into a tube. And just twist and poke. And the thing about a tube bead is I can then, while that stick is inside, I can roll it, and that might also make my opening a little bit larger. And I'm going to let this sit in the plate with that stick in there for a few minutes. And let's do another one. When you put these little appliques of color on, you want to be sure that they're really squeezed in there and not just sitting on the top. Let's do one with the regular stirring stick that has not been cut into a point. And we're twisting and poking, checking that I have it still as a tube shape if I want it to be a tube shape. You can try any shape that you can dream up. The secret to a bead is it has to have a hole in it. And depending on what you are going to be stringing through, you want to make sure that the hole in your bead is a large enough size. So I'm wiggling this one out and I'm fixing the top, and very carefully I'm going to put it down on my drying plate, trying not to hurt that hole, not to make that hole go out of shape. And I'm going to let that dry. And now let's say so we've done beads and tubes, balls and tubes. Let's say I want to use my cookie cutter. So I think before I use the cookie cutter, before you use your cookie cutter, I recommend that you do some experiments with the tools and just see what kind of textures you can get with the different tools in your kit, these very fancy tools that you have seen before. What kind of marks can you make? And you're sort of, this like kind of doodling when you learned how to write or learned how to draw. You get to find out what different marks you're going to be able to make and build up a kind of vocabulary of what is possible. And let's see, what didn't we use? I think maybe we used, nope, we didn't use this. And if I want that to hang either as a pendant or an earring, this would be too large for an earring, but if I want it to hang as a pendant, I can either take one of my little metal hooks and slide it in whatever side I decide is the top side, kind of like that, and just slide it in like that. Or I could make holes for hanging something that way. And anything that is going to dry flat, I'm going to suggest you leave it on your piece, on a piece of your paper so that you can be sure that it dries flat and not curved. And even think about turning it over. Actually, turning it over is a good thing to do to check, to make sure that my holes went all the way through. It's a good idea to keep turning it over as it's drying so that it's going to dry flat. So this is going to become some kind of a hanging thing, and maybe I will add some color to it this way. And this is kind of a test piece, just to see what I can do with it. And a little miniature rolling pin. And let's give a little texture and put that aside. So let's go back to the idea of using a cookie cutter. I'm going to start by making a ball and then flatten it. If I want, I can use my fancy rolling pin here. My miniature rolling pin, which is actually, of course, a pencil. So let's see. Okay, let's take this one, which is a simple flower shape. Some are easier than others to sneak out of the cookie cutter. And please notice that the cookie cutter has a folded edge and an unfolded edge. The unfolded edge is the best cutter. The folded edge is the best handle. So I'm using my finger, my pinky finger, to slide it out, and anything I made, any place I made marks that I don't want, I can fix, and I can add texture to this flower. I can add a colorful center. And maybe I add some color this way. And if this is going to be a pendant, I don't need to think about the back side. If it's going to be an earring, I might want to think about the back side, but I want to be careful that I don't mess up the texture that I've created on the front side. So maybe I'll just draw instead of adding color. And in part 3, we will be able to add details with a marker so that line drawings can be used to turn something simple into something fancier. So if this is going to be an earring, I'm going to want to put this wire in to be my hanging wire. I'm going to push it in, and I am not going to touch this until after it's dry. And if for some reason it didn't grab hold, we will add a little touch of white glue to the place where it is attached to the Play-Doh. So let's let that dry on a flat place on the plate, or it could dry on my wax paper. But what it's going to give me is a hook for a longer earring wire, or a hook for a shorter earring wire. A shorter earring wire. So there's one last thing to think about. What if I wanted to make a fancy pin? And what if I make this pin be this creature here? So I'm going to make it flat, maybe about 1/4 of an inch thick. And let's see if I've got enough. Yes, I do. And let's smooth it out. And it's got a nice smooth side. I'm going to use that for my top side. And I'm going to look for the place that is folded, and I'm going to look for the cutting edge. And you need a little bit more over here. Make sure it's not sticking. Smooth it out and line it up so it will fit and not be on a cracky place. And I've got the folded edge on the top, so I'm going to push down and take away the extra. And some of the animal cutters are easier than others to get out of the cookie cutter. I use my finger to push, and if my finger won't fit in there, I'm going to use the pencil. And I'm not going to worry if I change the shape, because this creature is kind of an imaginary animal. And I'm going to just shape him the way I want him to be. And if he's a pin, here's the fun thing about our pins. If he's going to be a pin, then I want to be sure that he or she or it has space. We want space for this fancy magnetic attachment, because that is going to attach like that. So there is in your package a little sticker, in case you are wondering what that little round sticker is for. If you slide that under your wax paper, let's make sure that you are having a place that is large enough for that to fit underneath. So that's pretty good. Okay, so now let's make our guy fancy. Maybe he's got polka dots. Polka dots are probably the easiest thing to make. And you can have polka dots of various sizes and shapes. And I'm going to flip him over and just press those down a little bit. But I do not want to lose the flat surface for sticking on that magnet pin back. So I'm going to put the flat, I'm going to press again to make sure that he is or she is flat. And I'm going to take some of those texture ideas. Well, first let's give him an eye. And I want to give him a little blue in his eye. And I can either make a little dot in there, or I can save the detailing for when I have the marker in lesson 3. So maybe my guy wants to, or gal, wants to be able to breathe. And maybe to chew or talk or laugh. And maybe I want toes. And maybe I want toes. And again, I could do this. I could do that with the marker in lesson 3, or I could do something now. And maybe there's something around here that is fancy. And maybe there's something on his back that's fancy. Maybe this guy has, or gal, has lots of polka dots. And let's just give him something for his ear. And I think that's it for that little creature. So the idea is to experiment. The idea is to use your hands, your imagination, your fancy tools, your wonderful colors, and have fun. See you next time. Thanks for joining.